Welcome to the channel and the first video in the series The Real History of Football, Sheffield, the home of football. You're probably wondering why I'm starting a video about football history in a B&Q car park. Well, I will tell you why I'm here, but before I do I thought I'd better explain how I want to approach the making of these videos. There are actually a lot of videos about football history on YouTube, but none I've seen so far go into any great depth in trying to understand the real history of the game. I know videos these days have to be snappy, quick, entertaining, but the cost of that, I think, especially with football videos, is we miss the opportunity to go into some real depth about the history of the game. I don't want to do that. I want to take the time and try and have a dialogue and explain some of the things that I don't think have been fully explained so far. These videos are not going to be snappy. Hopefully they will entertain as well as educate. If you're after short and snappy, then this series of videos is not for you, because I just don't think that short and snappy can allow for a sufficiently detailed enough explanation of just how the world's first association football culture emerged in the world, because it did, and it did in Sheffield, and it did right in the car park that we've just left. So I'm going to take you on a walk around some of the significant historical football locations in Sheffield. While I do, I'm hopefully in this video going to explain firstly why I decided to do this. So where are we? Well, we're in Sheffield, a northern English city of over 500,000 people on the eastern foothills of the Pennines. Sheffield is mainly known around the world for its innovations in specialist steels, as well as its production of fine cutlery and silverware. We're just south of the centre of Sheffield, just off the main A61 Queen's Road. The B&Q is on Queen's Road. The car park we were in was, in 1857, the first home and pitch of Sheffield FC, the world's first and oldest true association football club. We are currently walking up Charlotte Road towards the Olive Grove Council Depot. This depot is the site of Sheffield Wednesday's first permanent ground called Olive Grove. We then walk back down Charlotte Road and follow Charlotte Road up to Shoreham Street and the area that the Bramall Lane Stadium sits in. Bramall Lane is actually the oldest professional football stadium in the world, having been hosting football since 1862. Sheffield Wednesday played most of its major games there since their formation in 1867, right up to when they moved permanently to Olive Grove in 1887. Bramall Lane is simply flooded with football history. So as we continue up towards Olive Grove and take this walk around the area of Sheffield where organised association football began, as I've said earlier, my aim of this first video is to try and explain what has inspired me to do this. By this I mean make this series of videos. So, here we go. A bit about me then and where I'm coming from. I'm not originally from Sheffield. I was actually born in Bolton, which is another English northern town, but just over on the west of the Pennines, north of Manchester. I was actually born on a street called George Street, which was just the other side of the railway tracks in Bolton, from the then Bolton Wanderers ground, which was at Burnden Park. This is the programme from my very first English football game in 1974. Let's just break off for a minute as we've arrived at the Olive Grove depot site, which, as you can see, is a very short walk across the road from where organised association football first started with Sheffield FC in that B&Q car park we've just left. Olive Grove was Sheffield Wednesday's first permanent ground, and they moved here fairly late in our story in 1887. The main reason I've come up here is for you to try and appreciate just how much early football history there is in this area. The early explosion of the organised game around here didn't just happen with the development of one club in one ground, but it spread right across this part of the city in quite a concentrated area. Sheffield Wednesday themselves were very nomadic, and they had at least 4 other homes before they moved here. But you can find all 4 of these other grounds within just a few minutes' walk of where we are now. You realise as we go on that I'm trying to paint this image of an active, organised football culture developing from 1857 onwards around here. It was the first of its kind anywhere in the world, and is the reason why Sheffield has so many football firsts to claim, but more about all those later on. As we walk back down Charlotte Road towards B&Q where we started, let's get back to my story and why I'm doing this. So if you recall, I was born in Bolton, where I was first introduced to football. I then grew up in Southern Africa, in Zambia to be precise, and there I only actually had the Zambian international team to watch, since I don't recall any competitive league football happening while I was there at least. And then when we came back to England, I was aged 11, we moved to Sheffield. And probably due to the completely dramatic difference of my surroundings, I very quickly became interested in the city's local industrial history, because this was all around me. I used to love walking up and down the steep valleys on its western side of the city, looking for old mills, reservoirs, canals, mines, just old buildings, water wheels, and other examples of old industrial archaeology that still existed. I was so obsessed that my nickname at school became Floody. This is probably because I used to bore everybody stupid about stories from the great Sheffield flood of 1864, and that happened very close to where I lived at the time. Having then gained my taste for football in both Bolton and Zambia, it was inevitable that I would start following my local team once I arrived in Sheffield. Being on the northwestern side of the city, this meant that my team became Sheffield Wednesday. Later on, I followed England home and away for over 20 years, and it's safe to say that football has become a major part of my life. So, the fascination with the history of my new home city, of course, eventually spread out into other areas. As an active fan, this fascination, of course, included the city's footballing history. This historical interest in my adopted home is even today put to good use. I am, for example, an active official guide at Sheffield Cathedral. Given half a chance, I will talk about all things Sheffield, not just the cathedral, and this includes its football history, of course. So, as we walk past the B&Q car park again, let's get back to football, and let's get back to the history of football. Over time, I became aware that Sheffield was where you would find the world's oldest football clubs, the world's oldest football grounds, the oldest set of rules, the oldest cup competitions, plus many more significant football firsts. So over the years, as I learnt more and more about Sheffield's football history, it also dawned on me that fellow football supporters and others involved in the game around the world have completely no idea of Sheffield's involvement in the early development of the game. I can honestly say I've spoken to thousands of people across the world about Sheffield's links to football, and to a person, everybody has not had a clue about what I hope to reveal in this series of videos. This includes people who love football, who were born and still live in Sheffield. In mid-2022, the city hosted over 200 UEFA delegates at a conference held at Sheffield Cathedral. I attended this conference as a cathedral volunteer, and again, I still could not find anybody who knew about Sheffield's contribution to the game. And this is the game they make their living from. So as we turn up Charlotte Road off Queen's Road, going up towards Shoreham Street and the Bramwell Lane area, I just want to digress and point out that on our right hand side here was the location of the old mapping and web factory, and in 1926 here was made the Ryder Cup. Sam Ryder commissioned Mappin and Webb to produce the trophy, and this was the location of where it was actually made. There's a quiz question for somebody to be developed in there, some connection between the earliest roots of the game and the Ryder Cup. So I was talking about football fans not really being aware of Sheffield's footballing history being an inspiration for these videos. The other inspiration, which I hinted at the start, was the total lack of any accurate videos in places like YouTube about the origins of the game, especially noting Sheffield's contribution to the birth of the game. At best, Sheffield gets an occasional passing mention set against a series of unsubstantiated claims in somebody's poorly researched football history video attempt. Mostly it gets no attention from YouTube football historians, and this extends to the mainstream media producers who, in the interest of drama, choose to misrepresent how football evolved in its earliest days. I realise I'm starting to sound a little frustrated and probably a little controversial, but surely the actual real story behind the evolution of the game, surely there's a good script to be written somewhere in all that. As we carry on up Charlotte Road, this might be a good point to try and actually define what we actually mean by football, what this thing is that we're trying to get to the bottom of in terms of its history. What are we trying to trace the history of? That's the question, isn't it? So in these videos, I'm not trying to sell you the idea that football is any game just related to randomly kicking or throwing a ball around, and therefore must have its origins traced back to ancient China, remote Derbyshire villages, or a variety of different forms of ball games played by English public schools and universities during the 1800s. Just playing a game with a ball is not what we should be calling the game that's become known as association football. What we should be calling association football is a game played on a marked up pitch with 2 goals, where you're encouraged to not pick the ball up, but to use your feet to dribble and to pass the ball. This same game, of course, also discourages full body tackling or hacking your opponents to gain the possession that you need. This is a game played largely with your feet, and achieving progress is achieved, as I said, with your feet as a team against another team, and by scoring goals. There are towns, universities and countries that claim to have given birth to football, but they're not actually talking about the game we love and watch every Saturday, which is actually called association football. Once you've actually defined what it is you're trying to trace the origins of, then all roads do point to Sheffield. Let's just pause again from discussing the history and take stock of where we are. This is Bramall Lane Stadium, current home to Sheffield United. We are on John Street, and at the top of John Street is Bramall Lane, and the Bramall Lane stand, where if you've been here as an away fan, it's the stand you would most likely have been sat in. We're not going to go up to Bramall Lane, but we're going to go along Shoreham Street, which takes us along the back of the Kop. There's an amazing amount of football history associated with this place. Most of its firsts happened before its current occupants were even formed. It is officially the world's oldest football stadium, having first hosted football in 1862. It can claim many other firsts, including the first ever football cup final and the first ever floodlit game. Once again, you've seen by walking with me just how close this piece of footballing history is from where Sheffield FC started and the Sheffield Wednesday Olive Grove ground. All these historical football locations are minutes walk from each other. Just next to Bramall Lane, on the other side of Cherry Street, was the location of yet another piece of footballing history, the Sheaf House ground, where Sheffield Wednesday played from 1877. Just before we got to Bramall Lane, we were trying to define football and explaining that most places that claim to be the birthplace of the game didn't actually play what today we call football, a game played largely with feet and with minimal physical fouling. I'd like to end this video with one claim which I think is a credible exception to what we were just discussing, and that is the Cambridge University and its Trinity College rules. These rules are very similar to the Sheffield rules in their attempts to restrict handling and tackling, and so it is plausible to say that students from Sheffield may have returned from university having been influenced by them. The problem is we just don't have any documented evidence to back this up. Cambridge University claim that their rules date from 1856, which might be true, but it's not substantiated by any evidence. The only date mark on the 1856 rules is the 9th of December, but it doesn't state any year. I believe there was some influence from Cambridge University on how football developed in Sheffield. For example, the world's second oldest football club, Hallam, we know was set up by Cambridge graduates. It might have been the case, of course, that Sheffield's young men went to Cambridge and influenced how their university game developed. What is certainly true is that the Cambridge rules did not lead to the wider development of clubs, matches, tournaments, played by an ever-growing fan base from a wide selection of society at established grounds. The Cambridge game was closed, elitist, and no football development or culture that we know of came from it. The earliest known set of rules and organised game developments happened in Sheffield, and we do have a lot of documented evidence to back that up. Modern organised association football began in Sheffield. The culture of football began in Sheffield, not Cambridge Trinity College, but they do need this credible mention at this stage. So if you made it this far in the video, many thanks for watching and for walking with me. I did say I wouldn't be short and snappy, but hopefully this first video has laid the foundation for what comes next. Hopefully by taking you to some of football's earliest locations and showing you just how near they are to each other, I've started to paint the picture I'm intending, which is of a time in a city where something unique and incredible was starting to happen. The birth of a game organised with rules, clubs, tournaments, cups and grounds. The birth of association football and of football culture as we know it today. We've only just touched the tip of the iceberg, and in the next video I want to tackle the early rules of the game. It'll be another walk and discussion, and we'll aim to build on some of the topics we've so far discussed. Please like and subscribe if you want details of future videos, of course. Also, feel free to leave any comments. Until next time,